Youssef, can you please mute yourself?
Okay, let me see. Yeah, you want me to unmute or mute?
Put yourself on mute.
Unmute.
Yes. Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the event. Thank you all for coming. We'll just wait 1 more minute for a final fifth speaker to join us, and we'll start. Hi, Boukhalfa. Bonjour. Je te laisse te mettre en mute et je vais commencer l'événement. Okay. Bonjour tout le monde, bon après-midi, bienvenue à tous et à toutes. Avant de commencer formellement l'événement, je vais donner quelques précisions au niveau logistique en français et en anglais. Hi everyone, welcome everyone to our online side event on Algeria. Good afternoon to everyone, thank you for joining us. First, before we start formally, I will give some logistic kind of points on the event. I think we're all used to Zoom event after all this time. For everyone who needs some decisions, so we have interpretation, English and French. So at the bottom of your screen, you can choose the language you need. I already see a message in the chat. You have to choose your language at the bottom in interpretation. If you don't need any language, you don't choose any. So that's one thing. And the second thing is the event is public and recorded online and will be then shared online so that you are aware. I'll move to French now. Rebonjour tout le monde. Donc quelques éléments de logistique.
Good afternoon. A few logistic announcements. Please consider that there is a translation. You can go below the screen and click the relevant language. If there is any technical problem, please note it on the chat column and we'll try to sort it out. Please note that the event will be recorded and shared on our Facebook page and with you. Again, if you have any technical problem, don't hesitate to mention it on the chat. I will now switch into English.
Event formally. My name is Nadège Lahmar. I'm the Maghreb researcher at the Cairo Institute for Human Rights Studies. Welcome everyone and thank you for joining our online side event in parallel to the 50th session of the UN Human Rights Council, Nigeria, entitled An Alarming Regression on Human Rights, Assessment and Recommendations for Algeria. So we have today this online event on Algeria. Thank you to all our speakers from Algerian civil society for joining us today. And thank you to our 6 NGO sponsors for supporting this event today. Their names are on the flyer and invitation. I won't recall them today. So I won't take a lot of time, but basically very briefly introducing our event today. Our event focuses on the UPR, basically the human rights situation in Algeria, looking at it through the angle of the Universal Periodic Review of the government of Algeria, will take place at the UN Human Rights Council in November 2022. So today we chose 5 human rights topics. This event is obviously not exhaustive. We can't cover the entirety of the human rights situation, unfortunately, in Algeria, but we chose 5 topics with our 5 speakers today, and our speakers will try to give an overview of the situation, the evolution of this specific theme area in the past 5 years, with probably a focus on the last 2 or 3 years in Algeria, and they will give specific recommendations for change for the government of Algeria, and specifically for UN member states take on these recommendations in November when it's time for the UPR review. Our event today falls on the 5th of July, which is a specific date, a specific anniversary for Algeria, the anniversary of its 60th anniversary of its independence, which we did not choose this event to take place specifically on this day for that reason. I think it's all the more important that we address the human rights situation today, on this day, to kind of also bring this discussion to the forth, bring the human rights angle kind of to the discussion around the independence and the anniversary, also remind the government of Algeria and all those celebrating today that a celebration of Algeria's independence also needs to take into consideration the evolution that has taken place on the human rights situation, so that Algeria, not only an independent state, but also a state that promotes and guarantees the rule of law for all of its citizens 60 years after its independence. So without further ado, I'll give the floor to our speakers. I want to remind all our audience today that we will have a Q&A portion at the end. We will most probably take questions mostly on the Q&A box, so you can start sending in your questions and comments on the Q&A box or on the chat. And potentially, if we have time, and if the people who want to ask questions are identified and we know them, we can give them the floor to speak directly. So feel free to send your questions, and we will decide depending on the time. So now, without further ado, I would like to give the floor to our first speaker today, Farida Bouattoura from SHOAA for Human Rights, who woke up very early this morning from the US. Thank you, Farida, to speak to us about the situation of freedom of assembly, peaceful assembly and association in Algeria, and how it has evolved, and the recommendations she wants to share with UN member states. Go ahead, Farida.
Thank you so much, Nadège. Thank you for everybody that's attending, and thank you for giving me a chance to speak on this event. Happy 5th of July to everybody. Happy independence, Algerian independence. So without further ado, I will just jumping into our topic. Algeria has witnessed massive human rights violation by the Algerian authorities over the past 5 years. Notably, in the last 2 years, Algerian authorities have escalated their tactics with serious restrictions on freedom of assembly, association, and the use of legislation as a means to suffocate civil society. In the third UPR cycle, the Algerian government committed to ensure that they will reform the laws relating to assembly and association, in concert with its constitutional and international obligations. In this regard, the government continues to use legislation and penal code to restrict assembly and association's rights. Association is governed by a regime of prior authorization under the Law of Association 1206/2012, imposing significant restrictions on the creation and functioning of independent associations. For example, all organizations were required to re-register with the authorities under the 2012 law. Local authorities only selectively provide registration receipts. According to the 1206/2012, the authorities can reject or cancel registration on an association on vague criteria. Those running on unregistered association are subject to jail time. In this manner, the unhinged authoritative discretion can manipulate civil society and stifle dissent as they deem fit. In March and in April 2021, the State Council suspended and closed the Socialist Workers' Party, PST. In October 2021, the prominent organization, RAJ, was dissolved. The Article 95 bis was amended in April 2020, prescribing imprisonment up to 7 years, as well as a fine to anyone who receives funds or donation from a domestic or foreign state or institution. This all-encompassing law leaves great leverage for authoritative discretion and abusive interpretation. In addition, even the remittance from family members or international organization is subsumed under this article and severely punishable. An example of this is in April 2021, SOS Culture Bab El Oued, a youth cultural organization, was accused of procuring funds from a foreign power to produce provocative films, documentaries, and banners used for the Iraq protest. Law 9014 on the modalities of exercising trade union rights establishes a prior authorization regime, giving authorities complete discretion to refuse to register unions without clear motives and imposing restrictions on the constitution of trade union based on employment status, field of work, and nationality, in contradiction with Article 22 of the International Convent of Civil and Political Rights, ICCPR. Despite the recent amendment, which now includes foreign workers, the expression salaried workers was not reviewed. Therefore, the prior authorization regime for union creation is still in place and allows for interference from employers wanting to obstruct union work. Article 52 of the Algerian Constitution theoretically guarantees the right to freedom of peaceful assembly upon notification. However, theory and application remain at polar ends of the spectrum. Law number 9119 on public meetings and demonstration prohibits demonstration based on broad provisions that can easily be used to forbid criticism of authorities. In practice, it implements a regime of prior authorization in contradiction with Article 21 of the ICCPR. Both public meetings and demonstration require the submission of written requests to the local wali, which is the governor. In practice, the wali either does not respond to the requests or responds on the day of the event. The law does not provide for the possibility to challenge a refusal and allows for disproportionately harsh punitive action of up to 3 months to a year in prison for those who inaccurately make the declaration or participate in unauthoritative demonstration, even without their knowledge. In February 2019, the pro-democracy Iraq protest movement swept through Algeria in spite of a protest ban set to be put in place in Algeria since June 2001. The authorities responded by arresting scores of protesters, journalists, and activists, subjected them to judicial persecution and imprisonment, all based on overly broad provision of penal code. On May 2021, the High Security Council, chaired by President Tebboune, designated political opposition movement SMAC and Rashad as terrorist organization. The army released a documentary denouncing the criminal subversive plans of MAC and Rashad, while also incriminating French media and the states of Israel and Morocco. The council further announced it would arrest the members of those two movements until their total eradication. Recently modified Article 87 bis is another example of this boundless legislation enactment, which encompasses anyone or any institution, thus declares power change of the state as a direct violation of the law. The article uses vague language such as by any means whatsoever, accounting for any action it deems fit. The addition goes even further by listing certain individuals, political parties, and their association as terrorists and acts of terrorism. To conclude, the exercise of FOAA are based and framed on prior authorization from administrative authorities, as replies to notification are subject to bias, and any legitimate activity outside of this framework is sanctions. Parallels of this systematic oppression are also embedded in the penal code through vague provisions. These overreaching, and vague laws leave room for abusive interpretation. For these reasons, we'd like to make the following recommendations. The first being repeal Law 1206/2012 on association, Law 1204 relating to political parties, Law number 9119 to relating assemblies, and adopt new legislation setting up simple notification process in full compliance with ICCPR Articles 21 and 22. Our second recommendation is to repeal or review provision of the Penal Code limiting the rights to FOAA, such as, Article 97, Article 100, and Article 95 bis on foreign funding, Article 87 bis to 87 bis 14 relative to terrorist and terrorism subversive activities. Our third recommendation is to cease arbitrary arrest, persecution, and judicial harassment of all peaceful activists, and the unconditionally and immediate release of all detained for exercising their right to freedom of peaceful assembly, and all those baselessly detained for terrorism related charges. Once more, we thank you for your time and your commitment to human rights. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Farida. Thank you for this comprehensive review of the situation of peaceful assembly and freedom of association. It's a big topic, so thank you also for abiding by the time. We'll have time to discuss it a bit more in the Q&A section, but I think we understand and we know that there has been heavy deterioration of the situation with regards to these two topics, especially within the context of the Iraq protests. And this is especially worrying as Algeria in the last UPR cycle, for example, committed respecting public freedom and to ensuring a free and enabling environment for civil society. I will move on now to Boukhalfa, actually, since this is kind of related to what Farida talked about, to speak to us about freedom of expression and freedom of the press and give us his recommendation. So Boukhalfa bin Mamar from Riposte Internationale, Algerian organization based in France. Boukhalfa, you're muted. Oh, unmute, Boukhalfa.
On n'entend pas l'orateur.
Boukhalfa, moi je t'entends pas. C'est la même chose pour les autres.
On n'entend pas l'orateur. Voilà, là, nous pouvons entendre l'orateur. Je voulais m'exprimer, sorry, I'm going to speak in French. I'm very happy about the work achieved by all the team. It's really a big batch we are addressing here, and I will try to talk about freedom of expression and the treatment done by the authorities against the media and audiovisual organizations. I'll try to be as structured as possible. There is a context for prohibiting freedom since 2014. And according to the legislation of 2014, and there were many deputies from the opposition which were prosecuted, and especially the lawyer, Mr. Bouchechi, has alerted about the danger and the objective of prohibiting freedom of the authorities and to lock down using very strict control and repressive control, and by incriminating anyone against the country and relevant to law of 2014 concerning the information law. The repressive legislative framework was indicated in the 2004 law and the decree 2332 on the electronic media dating in November 2021, which was completing these repressive set of laws. And you have the decree, or rather the 54-55 article of the Constitution, which is very restrictive about all the media work and even of the activity of the press activity. So the penalties used are not in compliance with the international standard. We know that the nations are never giving any sentence, but here we can see the repressive spirit of articles which can penalize with imprisonments and while some proceedings will sometimes be very tough. So the authorities are very restrictive, and whenever there is a defamation which has been confirmed by any court, and we will deprive from the basic rights, and the person will be deprived, as I said, from the basic rights, and especially the guilty people. The amendments of April 2020 on law 2005 and 2005, as well as the June 2021, participate in incriminating of the journalistic activity, anyone using his or her profession and using freedom of expressions while relating topics related to the current situation of the country, the political, social the country. People will be sentenced with the head of accounts, and which and then somehow these people can be accused by terrorism. So we are always, threatened by these kind of accusations. This happened in a context which was voted. Actually, it was not voted, and there is no need to repeat the story of 87 beats that was proposed by a consultative body such as the Security Council, and then which also declared the classification of a certain number of political organizations in the country or outside the countries, qualifying them as a terrorist organization. And that there were extradition requests against people who are in other countries and which have been accused as being part of a terrorist organization. Obviously, these people were open and assumed the responsibility, but just to indicate that the context that is part of an approach to calm down the protest movement, and this also happened in a human disaster such as the fires which occurred in Kabylie. There were many, injured and casualties. And actually, we never had any investigations on the issue. There were voices asking for the responsibility and the accountability of this. And any citizens actually can call the authority. And this is the citizenship right to call the authorities, and why this caused legal proceedings for certain people. What we should also keep in mind that there were also arrests taking place among activists in Kabylie area. Monsieur Haboub Ben Moudian, for instance, was arrested. Mr. Azam. There were other activists known to be very close from the autonomous people, and the situation continued in September and October, and then Mrs. Camera was also missing, and the family didn't know for a few days where she was placed. There was also other arrests that could be part from an action film. So just to tell you that this article justified many arrests, many massive arrests in the autonomous groups in Kabylie, and they were, as we said, accused as being part of terrorist groups. I will try to be quick. My recommendations now, we suggest to modify Article 54 and 55 of the constitutions to remove any restrictions against the press and information activities. The second suggestions, we suggest that to remove Article 146 and 186 of the Penal Code, incriminating the freedom of expression. We need to readjust the law relevant to the information law and the law of 2014, again related to the audiovisual activity, and the article number 20 related to the electronic media in order to ensure a compliance with international practices relevant to freedom of press and expressions, and also to remove any restrictive measures with regard to the written press and remove any censorship provisions, and in case of any violations, the jurisdictions can be, of course, will define it. We consider as an urgent action to mandate an independent investigation, an international investigation, which can clear up about the circumstances of the death of Mr. Mohammed Amata, who is Algerian British guy who used also the social network, and who unfortunately passed away in an unclear situation. There were no investigation, and the Algerian authorities never commented on this issue. And also Mr. Hakim, which is imprisoned now for 3 months, and we don't know their conditions, and we don't know how also he passed away and in which conditions. So we would like to have investigations about the situation in areas of freedom deprivation, and try also to understand what is happening in jails, even for for any offense. And Algeria is committed to ensure the personal integrity of people, and we would like to have any investigations about all these people. And thank you very much, and sorry again for being so long. And so let me switch into English.
The situation of freedom of expression and press, we can see how the current legislation, whether it's the legislation focused on freedom of the press, like the Information Code, or the Penal Code itself, amended recently in 2020 and 2021, is still heavily used to enforce, to arbitrarily prosecute citizens and journalists for their peaceful speech. And thank you for highlighting the case of Mohamed Malt, journalist who died after a hunger strike in 2016, and the similar case of Hakim Debezi, prisoner of conscience, who died in April 2022, and still to this day we have no information and no investigation on his death in custody, in pretrial detention. So now, without taking more time, I will pass the floor to Ismahan Ait-Messaoud from Tharwa, Fatma, Nsoumer to speak to us about the situation gender equality.
Oui, merci beaucoup Nadège. Alors bonjour à toutes et à tous.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon to all of you. I'm very happy to be among you today. I will talk about the gender balance, and despite the commitment of the Algerian commitment and the last recommendation, we would like to take the necessary action against any discrimination and use any mechanism to defend people violated based on their gender, but no measure was done, and the legal framework in Nigeria is still very unfair. Also, the family code adopted in 1984 is the basis that generates all the types of discrimination against women. Moreover, the provisions are in full contradiction with the constitutional articles such as Article 35, 37, and 39, which ensures full equality in front of law without any discrimination, especially based on gender. So we can notice the violations, and they promote discriminations in the heritage, in marriage situation, and even in the statute of a woman. This code imposes very discriminatory conditions against women, and there is the labor code, which talks about parity in terms of employment access, and also equality in salaries. And despite the high participation of women in the educational environment, their level is still limited, and they are facing huge challenges to reach high positions. In the informal also level, these women are also undergoing discrimination, and moreover, the abortion can be required when the psychological and mental situation of women is threatened. If you can speak slowly to help the interpreters. Unfortunately, I have a very short time, so I'll try to speak slower. I said that as for the therapeutic abortion, this is allowed only if the psychological and the mental status of the mother is threatened. However, the procedure is so long that women loses their access to therapeutic abortions. In March 21, the quota law was replaced by the organic law related to the electoral code, which states a parity in the elections. Nevertheless, since it's an open list and without classification, the equity was not guaranteed in the different seats. These measures decreased the number of participation of women, which were already at 8% in 2021 versus 26 in 2017. Also, the media and the official speeches are promoting stereotypes during the legislative campaigns. The head of the parties have compared the women leaders as strawberries without being penalized. The victims of violence based on gender do not have any protections, no recognitions, and the penal code amended in 2015 did a partial progression on physical abuse, and the legal framework is very weak. The penal code is not defining the crime relevant rape, and they are not addressing any sexual abuse, and they are not really focusing on the physical integrity. There is no law on this topic, and there are not non-official statistics. In addition, in reference to the again criminal code, I don't know what happens. I have an echo. Which language is Ismahan? Can you hear me, Ismahan? Yes, very well. But there is an echo. I don't know what happened. So, on this topic, we do not have any official statistics. Moreover, many articles relevant to the criminal code can escape the sanction if the victim, allows for pardons. The women going for proceedings are threatened and they are obliged to withdraw their claims, especially from the official agents. And according to Article 40 of the Constitution introduced in 2020, the shelters for women are very limited, and they look more like jails rather than shelters, which can be appropriate for women. And there is, again, no guarantee for protection, no resources allocated for women and for the relevant institutions. So these survivors are depending on their the perpetrators and are stigmatized. This can cause a daily disaster that cannot be resolved. Article 3380 and 333 of the Criminal Code is also condemning the sexual homosexuals activities and the persecutions of the LGBTI community is even worse, and no protection is available, and that there is strong discrimination against this group. The prosecution is getting more and more important for the LGBTI plus community. As for the feminist organizations, women were in the first rank during the hierarchy, and despite internal protests, there were also the clampdown of the authority on the feminists because they were defending the women, and such as Dalila or Karima, they were campaigns against them and against Fatma. Concerning the freedom of expressions, the LGBTI are evolving with a very timid activity, and they are prosecuted by the local authorities as well as for the society. As for the recommendations, we need to remove any discrimination law relevant to women and LGBT in the national legislation, including the Family Code and the Article 333 and 333 incriminating homosexual relationship, and the Article of 330 of the Criminal Code allowing the perpetrators to be forgiven, and adapt any measures in order to fight against any discrimination based on gender in compliance with the CIHRS, and take into account all the shelters and implement appropriate programs for victims, to review the national policies and conduct awareness campaigns to fight against stereotypes and end any threats against feminists, LGBT, and women that would like to defend their rights according to the law. Also stop any prosecutions for these people. Ratify the optional protocol and submit a periodic review, and we need to adopt the Istanbul Conventions based on a gender approach, and ask the Conseil de l'Europe to help against these violence against women. And thank you very much, and sorry for being late.
Merci beaucoup, Ismahan.
Thank you very much, Ismahan.
Thank you, Ismahan, for this overview of the situation for gender equality and gender-based violence. I note that you specifically highlighted the repression and arbitrary prosecution of women rights defenders and feminist activists within the already heavy repression that took place in the last couple of years against the Hirak and peaceful dissent. The increased number of female prisoners is, I think, a strong indicator of this these increased attacks against feminist activists and women rights defender. And I also noticed that you highlighted, despite specific commitment to supporting victims of gender-based violence made in 2017, the Algerian government has not taken any specific action, whether it be from the psychosocial support to victims, the legal support, the protection in terms of distancing measures from their assaulters. All of this has not taken place. So I think it's important to highlight this inaction, basically. Now we have two speakers left. Before I give them the floor, I want to highlight you can send your questions and comment in the chat or in the Q&A box, so that we'll take them at the end. So I'll move now to Youssef, Ourahmane, activist on freedom of religion and belief, and also members himself, vice president actually of the Algerian Protestant Church. He will give us an overview of the situation of freedom of religion and belief and his specific recommendations. Youssef, you have to unmute yourself.
Do you hear me now?
Yes, perfect.
Very good. Farida, thank you very much, for having me to speak. I was a bit confused today because there's a big meeting now in London, which I was also speaking on Zoom about the freedom of religion in Algeria. So anyhow, I didn't know which one is which, but thank you very much really for helping me to solve my confusion. But thank you for having us, or having me, to be able to share with you. My name is Youssef Ourahmane. I am the vice president of what we call the EPA, the Algerian Protestant Church Association. And actually, I have been very much involved with the association for many, many years. And we have launched a big campaign to advocate for the Algerian church and also the persecutions we have been facing here in Algeria. While I'm speaking to you from Algeria anyhow, I would like just to give an overview of the church in Algeria, because many, they think that the church doesn't exist, it's not in a lie, but anyhow, today there is a lot of evidence on YouTube, on the TV, on everything, Christian TV channels, of course, the church is existing in Algeria. So the church existed in Algeria since the early centuries, since the 2nd century, the church has existed. And we do have much evidence documented and ruins of the church in the east of the country, in Cherchel as well, nearby Algiers, and of course, Algeria is well known by the by Saint Augustine, who has a big influence on the Catholic Church doctrine today. And actually, they all refer to his teaching. So the church in Algeria has not been new. And Saint Augustine, he worked and labored in Algeria for about 40 years. He was based in Ahipo, which is now as CIHRS, nearby Annaba. Unfortunately, the invasion of Islam on the 7th century, the church was very weak to resist the spread of Islam in the country. By the 9th century, the church was totally vanished. By the 12th, of course, century, we lost every documentation. Back in 1830, of course, when the French came to colonize Algeria, so Christianity came back to Algeria with the French, but also the Algerians, they resisted so much the influence of the church at the time, of the Christians as well, and there were very, very little conversions. But what we call the evangelical and the Protestant evangelists, or the Protestant missionaries, came to Algeria back in 1881. And actually, it was very hard for the first 100 years, but anyhow, back in July 1981, we have what we call the biggest awakening, where many Muslims and Algerians, especially in the Kabylie, become Christians. And now today we have tens and tens of thousands of Christians who are converted from Islam, and we live in Algeria. And actually the church has been very growing very rapidly, especially among the Kabylie people. So anyhow, today we have what we call the Algerian Protestant Church Association, and the license has been granted to us back in 1974. But at that time, they were only foreigners, but now it has become 100% all Algerians. So at the moment, we have 47 churches that are member with the Alliance, and many, many other groups and churches has chosen not to be a member. I will say maybe the number of the believers of the Christians here in Algeria is over 140,000. But our case is totally different than Egypt or Lebanon or Jordan or anyone, because our churches are almost 100% ex-Muslims. So all our pastors, our leaders, our evangelists, you name it, we were all Muslims. And that's just make a huge difference. And of course, this is a big hassle for the Algerian government. So they have been trying to find ways how to stop it, how to speed, of course, to stop the growth. And of course, as you know, back in 2006, they introduced what we call the Ordinances of 2006. That has been very, very difficult for us. But I think there's many articles which I would like to recommend it for you to read. But anyhow, we have been condemned, a lot of court cases, a lot of prison sentences, which is so many things. Myself, I have been condemned for 3 years in prison back in 2008, because I went known all over the world with my books and also my campaign. So there was a lot of pressure from the Algerian government, the Algerian embassies. Anyhow, myself and others were released, but I have been at least maybe 26 times at the police for interrogations. Just recently, about 2 weeks ago, I spent another 4 or 5 hours there, just answering their questions. So anyhow, what are our demands and what we are asking for? At the moment, all the churches that we have, except 3, they are all house churches. You know, it's our houses that we will convert to a church, because simply the Algerian government does not give us any permit to build churches. Impossible. We tried, didn't work at all. But anyhow, we have only 3 churches now, which is in Oran, Algiers, and Constantine, that are built as the churches, and also in the Kabir there are 2. That still, you know, because of the Algerian government, what we say, I mean, reasons, they say, well, your houses, they were built as a house, not as a church. So, but anyhow, they have closed many churches now, but they have also closed the churches that has been built as a church. So their argument is totally, I mean, false. So at the moment, we have 19 churches closed by the authorities. And about 3 or 6, at least 6 house churches has been stopped to function. We are having a lot of difficulties to register our children with Christian names, and the matter always has to go to be brought to the court. And sometimes it takes up to 18 months to be able to register our children with Christian names. So our children also are forced to learn about Islam and memorize the Quran, and also the Bible Society have not we haven't received or got any permission to import Christian literature for a year or 2 years now, and they always making a lot of hassle, a lot of problems for us to be able to import the Christian literature, and also issuing visas for overseas teachers and pastors to train Algerian pastors and also leaders are always refused. If they know any embassy in Algeria, any Algerian embassies all over the world, if they know that you are a pastor or you are working with a Christian organization, your visa will be refused. What is their tactics? They want to see the Algerian church here being very weak and also disappear. That's the tactic. But anyhow, our main challenge at the moment is renewing the EPA, which is the Algerian Protestant Church Association license that has been granted, as I said early on, since 1974. So we have had a lot of difficulties to renew it since 2014. At the moment, we are illegal. This is why we come and close our churches, because they said, yes, they are illegal. So that's actually one of the things I would like to share, but also you can also I would like to mention harassment. We get a lot of harassment, myself, a lot of harassment, traveling out of Algeria, coming back to Algeria, always I was harassed by the police at the airports. And simply when I saw our lawyer, he said to me, they just want to make life difficult and hard for you. And we are constantly watched, they watch our Facebook, our YouTube, they watch our homes, and the all kinds of things, you know, to make the churches weak and make us afraid and weak. But the Algerian church, which I would like to assure you, is totally determined not to give up. We will not give up. We will continue to battle. We will continue to stand for our rights, and we will not give up at all. And I am really thankful, really. Yes, I'm thankful for what God is doing in this land. Thank you.
Thank you. Could you have any specific recommendations for UN member states, Youssef, for the UPR?
Well, actually, I can send to you all this copy, but our main recommendation is to be able to renew the license of the APA, which is the license of our organization that has not been renewed since 2014. Unfortunately, we have sent all the documents, all the papers, but they said, yes, we have not received nothing, which is not true because we register all our correspondence with the Minister of Interior. This is our main, really, recommendation.
Thank you very much, Youssef, for this overview of the situation of Christian minorities in Algeria. I want to highlight also, maybe we don't have a lot of time to cover this as well, but the situation also is similarly difficult for other religious minorities or people of other faiths, such as the Ahmadi, for example, who also cannot register, and who also face arbitrary persecutions, arrests, harassment. Even recently, as of early the 12th of June, I believe, 3 men belonging to the Ahmadi faith have been arrested and are still in pretrial detention, for example. So I want to raise that as well as an issue related to FORB that deserves the attention of UN member states in November.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Youssef. I'll let you mute yourself and we'll get back to you in the Q&A section. So our final speaker, Sofiane Chouiter from the Justitia Center for the legal protection of victims of human rights violations in Algeria, also made the effort to wake up early for us. He's speaking to us from Montreal, Canada. And he will speak to us about the judicial system and judicial independence and access to justice in general, which underpins many of the issues that we spoke about in the last less than an hour. Sofiane, you have the floor.
Merci Nadège, merci
Thank you very much, Nadège. Thank you to Cairo Institute for this workshop. My intervention will be based on a topic that will be raised during the UPR during the November session. The topic is access to justice and the independence of the judicial system in Algeria. Algeria in December 2020 adopted a modified constitution. There's been a referendum that's been boycotted by the majority of the population. The process of the revision of the constitution has been so much impacted by unlawful things that the judge, the ancient judge of the human rights, resigned, and he published his letter and addressed it to the president, and where he explained explicitly the reasons of his resigning act from the commission of the revision of the constitution. This referendum took place in a context of repression of all civil and civic and political freedoms. In theory, the amended constitution guarantees fundamental rights, but in practice, this protection is conditioned by a national legislation which is very restrictive. I don't know whether many countries share it. There is a specificity in Algeria. The constitution recognizes freedoms and rights, but we issue laws that restrict freedoms. And of course, these rights recognized by the constitution have no meaning. Article 34, that's been amended by the new constitution, was clear. It enables to restrict freedoms and liberties very broadly and in a vague manner. So it remains one of the main provisions of the new constitution, which is so important for the militants of human rights. Despite the fact that the constitution has been amended and it claims the independence of the judiciary system, but in reality, it ensures that the executive power prevails on the judiciary authority, and the conclusion is the judiciary system is surely not independent. The president preserves a lot of powers. He nominates most of the actors of the judicial system, such as the chair of the Supreme Court, the Council of State. He nominates the new Constitutional Court, the appeal courts. The presidents of all courts are nominated by the president. So he doesn't really have any control from the legislative power during these nominations. He has all prerogatives. The Algerian constitution maintains a very high presence of the executive actors in the High Council of Magistrature, the High Council of Magistrature is directed by chaired by the president, who nominates directly 19 members out of 23, council. So the president chooses 19 of them. He has an excessive power of nomination within the council, higher council of magistrature. So from a theoretical point of view, that we can say that the judicial system in Algeria is not really independent versus the executive power. In practice, we have noticed that the members of the judicial apparatus, like lawyers, have been sanctioned arbitrarily. For the members of the judiciary apparatus, who have been, of course, sued, penally speaking, we can take the case of Judge Saadin Marzouk, who's been fired by a decision from the Higher Council of Magistrature in 2021. This judge, Saadin Marzouk, is the founder of a syndicate that is not registered, called the Club of Judges. He's been practically fired. The council has also addressed warnings and sanctions and disciplinary actions against the, of course, the deputy prosecutor of the Tribunal of Algiers, Mohammed Belhadi, who's been put in a rural place outside Algiers as a punishment. And during an audience with the militants of Al-Hiraq, he defended the right to protest, and he asked to acquit the activists who have been arrested during the Hiraq. In 2019, the judge Ourahmane, who was the chair of the Court of Appeal of Tipaza, and during an audience against an appeal against the decision made by Karim Tabu, who was the representative of a non-authorized party. After this appeal, she ordered the liberation of Mr. Karim Taboul, and Mr. Noura Mokrani was, of course, the chair of the tribunal of Tipaza, and she's been sent to work in another tribunal far away from the one where she was as a sanction. We also have the example of Mr. Bassem Mazar, who is a member of the Algerian League for Human Rights, who's been, of course, sued legally in 2019 because he participated in the peaceful protests of the Hiraq. He also the clerk and the Mr. Mohammed Harika, who's been suspended in 2018 and arrested in 2021 because he was a pacifist, pacific activist. Also, for the lawyers, we have the most famous case is the case of Mr. Abdurraouf Salam, who's been arrested on the 26th of May 2021 and sued because he was accused of participating in activities of terrorist organizations and threatening the state security. At the end, he's been detained in prison because he was an activist and because he was focused, he was insisting on the importance of freedom of expression in Algeria. He's been sentenced to 3 years of prison. He spent 1 year there, and he spent 1 year and he's been freed. We have also 2 other lawyers who are still in prison, Abdelkader Shudra and Yassine Khalifi, because they asked for freedom of expression. Mr. Abdelkader Shudra was arrested on the 14th of May 2022 as he was participating in a peaceful protest near the prison of Qli'a in the province of Tipaza. They were protesting against the suspicious death of Hakim Debazi, who was an activist who died in prison. Yassine Khalifi was summoned by the police of Algiers in May 2022, and he was he was detained, and he's going to be, of course, in front of the tribunal. So they are accused, both are accused of encouraging people to hatred and uprisings against the state. So this practice of repression against the lawyers and judges in their work did affect very deeply the principle of fair trials. For example, the fair trials, from the very beginning of the arrest of an individual by the police or the gendarmerie, these rights are practically trampled, and the authorities refuse the access of a lawyer to him in his cell or to a visit of his family. And of course, these people have no access to external world. So access to a lawyer during the detention period has always been refused systematically. There are some exceptional cases where it took place, but it's always done after the interviews are conducted. We also noticed seeing the increasing number of people being arrested temporarily without any justification. The trials of persons take place in timelines that are not acceptable, or with a lot of delays and without any valid justification. I know cases of people who have been detained just because they expressed an opinion on a social network, and these are, of course, opinion, of course, in infractions, but they can remain free and they can be sentenced later. Unfortunately, the tribunals in Algeria use they get of course information from people through torture, and some tribunals, of course, do not respect the International Convention Against Torture. We also have the problem of access to justice at the international level. There is the promulgation of course, the law 1499, which punishes any person who communicates judicial documents to NGOs or to international lawyers, which of course impeaches the access to these documents in order to better defend these victims of human rights violations, and to enable, of course, foreign NGOs to have a better analysis of these cases and these documents. Sofiane, time is up. The other case is impunity. The Algerian authorities very rarely lead investigations on cases of suspect deaths in detention, or torture, or ill treatments in detention centers. So we have always noticed the refusal of the authorities to lead independent investigations. I join the principle and confirm that there is a principle of impunity in Algeria that is still existing, especially with the amnesty laws after the civil war in the 90s, with the excuse of national reconciliation, and of course the law of 2006, which still maintains the immunity of the state servants and punishes any person who would like to open a debate on the black years, the 90s. The recommendations we would like to make to the United Nations member states for their next meeting in November is to modify the constitution to guarantee a clear separation between, of course, the executive and judiciary power authority, abrogate the Article 34 of the Constitution, and make sure that the human rights are in conformity with the international standards, stopping suing the judicial staff with arbitrarily, doing also some amendments regarding the official documents, regarding the freedom of information, align the legislation, especially the penal code, especially with the international standards, and with Article 15 of the Convention Against Torture, ratifying the International Convention for the protection of all persons against enforced, of course, disparitions, abrogating the Charter for the national reconciliation, and abrogating all the general laws of amnesty, guaranteeing, of course, independent investigations on all allegations of missing people, and providing the families with the necessary compensations and psychological assistance, and assisting all the persons who are asking for justice regarding the crimes that have been committed in the 90s. Thank you. Thank you, Sofiane.
For giving us this broad overview of the situation for the independence of the judiciary and access to justice, which we see continues to be an important issue in Algeria, whether for victims of grave human rights violations or victims of arbitrary detention. But this also has ramifications for victims of gender-based violence, for instance, as shown by Ismahan. So I don't see any questions right now, so I will briefly kind of also mention a few other issues. As I said in the beginning, we only chose 5 subjects, and we were only able to cover a few angles of even these big subjects. So I would also like to recall that an important issue with regards to Algeria in the upcoming UPR, it's the Algerian government's cooperation with UN mechanism, which has been lacking. For example, we raised, several of our speakers raised issues in terms of the submission of periodic reports. For example, the report to the CIHRS was, the last one was submitted in 2006. So huge delays can be seen in terms of the submissions of reports to UN mechanism and treaty bodies. Also, for example, requests of visits from UN special procedures. There are 5 requests pending, for example, from UN special procedures since 1997. The oldest one, the working group on enforced disappearance, asked for a visit, and no response from the Algerian government. So I think an important recommendation would be for Algeria to reply to these requests and to issue a standing invitation to UN special procedures. Most recent one, the special rapporteur on the rights of the situation of human rights defender asked for a visit in February of this year, and to our knowledge, there are still no response from the Algerian governments. Another point I wanted to mention also that we were not able to cover today is the rights of migrants, refugees, and asylum seekers in Algeria, which is an extremely important topic. Fortunately, in Algeria, human rights defenders and activists working on this subject are themselves victims of repression and are not able to speak publicly on this subject under the threat of prosecution and worse. So for this reason, we're not able to have a speaker today on this subject. But I wanted to highlight that Algerians' migration policy remains dominated by violent practices of raid, mass expulsion, deportation, and arbitrary detention in inhumane, degrading conditions based on racial profiling in violation of the principle of non-refoulement. And Algeria also, important to note, is that Algeria in 2017 committed in the last UPR to adopt asylum legislation, and this still has not been done. So this is important to highlight, and it should be again reminded, it should be again requested of Algeria in November to adopt asylum legislation and seize these extremely problematic practices of mass expulsions, returns, and arbitrary detention of migrants, among other issues. So now going back to our speaker, I think we have several requests in the chat to share the talking points of the speakers and the recommendations. So we will definitely do this. And please note all the content that was shared by our speaker today is available in the UPR reports submitted last March. Some of them are published. For example, our organization, the Cairo Institute, has published them on our website. The Dignity Institute, Danish Institute Against Torture, has published also the report, and all of the report will be available on the page of UPR Info and CIHRS, I believe, in the coming months. But we will definitely share a few points with people who requested. Now I would like to ask some of our speakers. I think an important point perhaps that we could come back to is the constitutional revision of December 2020. I want to ask a few of our speakers to kind of come back to it very quickly. We have less than 10 minutes. I know, for example, with the questions of access to justice and judicial independence, there are some relevant articles such as Article 30, Paragraph 4, and Article 34. I don't know, Sofiane, if you could come back on these articles, especially Article 34, and their impact on access to justice and the protection of human rights. And I wonder, Youssef, if you could also come back on the impact of this constitutional revision with regards to freedom of religion. I think there was an important change that you could also highlight. Sofiane, do you want to take the floor first?
En fait de compte, bon, la spécificité en Algérie, c'est que
in Algeria, and even starting from 89, since we started the democratic process with the events that took place, we had a liberal constitution. It was the first time explicitly the constitution recognizes rights and freedoms. But the reality, unfortunately, is different because the legislative power, in the beginning, of course, we talked about the majority of the constitutional provisions, and we always find that these rights, in practice, must be, of course, in conformity with the laws, and the laws that are adopted are restrictive. They are against freedom. They are not laws that enable or facilitate the possibility to enjoy these laws and use them. These are obstacles and hurdles. So when we talk about the right to of assembly, it is guaranteed by the Constitution, by the amendments. On December 91, our amendments or amendments of 1989 on the right of assembly stipulate and the obtention of an authorization from the prefect or the governor, an authorization that gives the governor to refuse at any time he wants the organization of any protest that criticizes the governmental policies. So the problem here is that the laws are very restrictive, and we have the freedoms of course, rights mentioned by the Constitution, but in reality, we cannot have a reliable access to justice, whether to declare that these laws are anti-constitutional, whether by the ancient council or the Constitutional Court. We have the organic law that organizes the that enables the citizens to make an appeal at the level of the Constitutional Court, but which is a very complex procedure because it has to be accepted by the judge himself and then by the Supreme Court. There are many appeals that have been rejected by this Supreme Court or by the judge in charge of the case. On the other hand, even we have the Article 671 that's been, of course, recently amended in 2020, which obliges the judge to enforce the international conventions ratified by Algeria. But in reality, our judges do not enforce the international law. We don't even have a jurisprudence at this level. Since many years, I'm following the situation in Algeria. I'm making a lot of research from a legislative point of view. I don't find any jurisprudence in terms of freedoms and rights. Did you mention Article 34? It's interesting also. Yes. Yeah. Now, regarding Article 34, it did legalize or constitutionalize the restriction of rights in a very vague manner and very broad manner, because international law allows, if we take Article 4 of the International Pact, which permits to limit some rights whenever they impact national security. But there are specific conditions with it, because there is the principle of proportionality and justification of these measures, or in the provisions of our articles of the Article 34 of our Constitution. It's very vague. It even enables the judge to refuse and justify the restrictive law, the laws against freedom. Thank you very much, Sofiane. Thank you for talking about this Article 34. Youssef, you want to mention something regarding the freedom of...
At the moment, there is no freedom of religion in the new constitution. The article has been removed. The article that exists before now does not exist anymore. But one of our main struggle here with what we call the Ordinances of Mars 2006, that ordinances was created, they said to us, to organize the non-Muslim worship. And I would like you really to, I mean, it is in Google now, you can search for the ordinances and you can read it. And actually within these ordinances, only they want to make life very hard for us, but also they can find any way to accuse us. And then, of course, they brought us to court, and we have had so many court cases. Now, within these ordinances of March 2006, there is what we call the article number 8, 9, and 10, and also 11. It says that if you shake the faith of a Muslim, what does it mean, shaking a faith of a Muslim in Algeria? It means if you talk to him about another religion, especially Christianity, of course, or you will give him something to read, which is another religion as well, or even you do something good. If you find a Muslim who is hungry, or is thirsty, or is sick, or is homeless, and you help him, and somehow he sympathizes with your faith as a Christian or as a Jew, you will be in trouble. They will say you have broken the law, because the article is very clear. You cannot shake the faith of the Muslim, let alone when you witness you talk about your Christian faith, or you give them something to read. What are the consequences? The consequences, if you are a church member, you can end up in prison up to 3 years. We have had many cases like this. If you are a church leader, you can end up in prison between 1 to 5 years. We have also cases like this. And the fine can go up to the equivalent of about 1,200,000 dinars. So our main struggle now with these ordinances of March 2006, and actually when they put these ordinances together, they said within these new ordinances, they said we are going to establish a new commission that will help you to organize your worship. But that organization or that constituted organization has never existed. So that's our main struggle really today with these ordinances of March 2006.
Thank you, Youssef. Well noted. We have only a couple of minutes, so I'll want to ask a last question to Ismahan also. I think the issue of gender-based violence deserves also a lot of attention, especially the impacts of the COVID pandemic. And I know you mentioned, for example, there was no action from authority in terms of support to victims, in terms of the increase of the number of feminicides, and in terms to access to protection centers for victims. Ismahan, could you maybe tell us a few very quickly words about this?
Oui, bien entendu. Alors concernant déjà les centres.
Of course, concerning the shelters for physically abused women, I would like to refer Article 40 of 2020, which stipulates that the state will protect women against any type of violence in any place and any circumstances in the professional and public space, and the victims can have access to shelters and to judiciary assistance and to resort to any shelter. However, we have only 2 public shelters, and that these 2 centers are more similar to a jail rather than a center, because they don't have any psychological assistance or any integration to the society, and women are really fully independent and subject to other forms of violence. In this context, the government also talks about programs against violence, but a few years ago, the Ben Center, which has a good capacity, was closed for unknown reasons. Now, as for the pandemic crisis and its impact on women workers in the informal sector, with COVID, many women in the informal sector in a precarious situation, such as cleaning ladies, which are not declared, or such as women working in traditional bakeries. There are no programs allocated for these women. They have not been considered, although they are Algerian citizens. And normally they should benefit from the same rights as the rest of the other citizens in Algeria. As for the last question, could you please again repeat the last question? You spoke about the actors, about the workers, and the repression, correct? Was there any other question? I wanted to know about the COVID impact and the measures taken by the authorities. I believe I answered roughly to your questions, and I think that earlier I provided you with a few examples. Unfortunately, we don't have much time left. We need to conclude. Thank you very much, Ismahan.
Unfortunately, we can't go over everything. I'm sure we'll have other opportunities and other times for exchanges about these various themes, and especially ahead of the UPR in November. So thank you again to all our speakers who took the time to speak today and to prepare these recommendations, and thank you to the participants and attendees today. And I remind you again that the event is recorded and will be available online for anyone who wishes to watch it again. Thank you very much. Bye everyone. Merci à tous et à toutes.